Hey, Dad. How are you?
Really great, Shanti. Thanks for having me back.
Uh,
Really love doing this.
it's one of the favorite things I've ever done. The podcast itself, and then specifically podcasting with you and having this opportunity to share you with people. My dad is my first repeat guest, and I have a segment on the podcast it's my podcast, so there will be music. And today is also it's my podcast, so there will be my dad more than once. And it's
Yay.
a thrill. His first podcast interview with me, the response was so positive and there was a lot of it too. So we can also say he's back by popular demand. We talked about so much last time, then realized there is so much more to talk about. My dad and I have a career advice column called Tuesdays with Shanti's Dad that I share on LinkedIn. And in that advice column, I headline it by saying he's wise, he's my go-to guy, now I share him with you. And that's what today is about, but the live
Mhm.
version, which is always better. When I say wise, there's wise, hey, that guy's smart, which my dad is. And then there's wise in a, wow, that's fascinating and feels true at a deep level and beautifully expressed in a way that's also super accessible. And that's the extra level of wise that I would describe about my dad. He joins us here at the campfire as a member of the underrepresented community of veterans. It turns out that his time in Vietnam really shaped everything that came after for him. We talked about it in the last episode, and there's some more layers today. My dad's a retired ad guy who spent 50 years as a copywriter, partner, and CEO, providing advertising, marketing, branding, and PR for local, national, and international clients. He's a published author of 2 books with more to come, an active musician and teller of jokes. He has a dedicated exercise routine that's initiated by his wife, Carol, who I call Poopsie. Multiple philanthropic volunteer efforts, very much one heck of a busy retired guy. His default mood is gratitude, which we will definitely be talking about today. And in news that will surprise absolutely no one that knows him, he's the best, kindest, most supportive, and just wonderful dad.
Good grief.
Yeah, I know. It's a lot.
You're very kind and prejudiced.
Both, yes. And
Yeah.
I often say dad bias aside and then talk about you, and people just nod a lot because it's just what it is.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. It means so much to me to hear that. Tears me up.
Good.
You didn't mention that I have a Dixieland band also.
I did say musician, but tell us more about your
Yeah.
Dixieland band.
There's 8 of us, and we just love Dixieland music, and we love playing it. It's one of the most fun things I do in my whole life is playing with that group. And as a clarinet player, Dixieland is the most fun kind of music to play.
Yeah. We've seen you perform live, of course, and you're ridiculously good as a collective and, of course, individually. And again, dad bias aside, and you even did some recording. You went into the recording studio, right?
That's because of you. For my 75th birthday, Shanti gave me the most wonderful gift. She gave me a day in a recording studio to record the band. I didn't use it until I was about 80. I couldn't get a group together to do it, and I was sure that it would no longer be valid when I called them. But I said, you got to do it. My daughter did this for me. So they did, and we spent the day in the studio, and we did make an album, which is terrific. Could listen to it all the time.
It is terrific. Just tell everyone real quick, in addition to clarinet, what instruments do you play?
Piano and saxophone.
I can walk into a room at any time or be sitting in a different room of the house and music starts out of nowhere and dad just puts on a show and plays a few songs and we all just stop what we're doing and listen, and then the day goes on as it was, but it's a beautiful experience.
I'm famous for never letting a piano go unplayed. Wherever we are, whether it's a hotel, restaurant, I'll always sit down and play something on the piano if I get permission. I just love playing the piano. When you play clarinet and saxophone, you could only play one note at a time. And on the piano, you get to use all 10 fingers and make beautiful chords. But Shanti's a terrific guitar player, and I can't get one chord out of a guitar.
I'm not terrific, but okay. And we're going to keep working on that one chord for you. I feel it coming. Joke, please. Let's make it short and punny.
Whoa.
Short and punny.
Here's the shortest, punniest joke I know. A minister, a priest, and a rabbit go into a bar. And the rabbit looks around and says, I think I'm a typo.
Oh, my God, it took me a minute. Wow, that is fantastic. Thank you. Thank
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah,
Love that
great.
one.
I'm glad to have that captured for posterity. All right. So my dad's pronouns are he, him. And again, he was in the Army and then in Vietnam. So what year were you drafted? And then when were you in Vietnam?
I was drafted in 1963, and I was in Vietnam as one of the first troops over after the Gulf of Tonkin in 1964.
Okay. And you've said that, because I at some point referred to front lines and trying to understand your time in Vietnam, and you said there's no such thing as front lines. Can you explain that a little bit?
This was a war in a country that we had no idea how to fight a war. It was not head-to-head frontline battles. It was them hiding in trees and tunnels under the ground and us plunking around trying to find them, and then them attacking us and us trying to hurt them and defend ourselves at the same time, and then they would disappear again. And no matter what we did, couldn't hurt them because they were underground. It was very tough hurting the actual troops, except when they decided to come out and fight with us. It was the kind of war we fought against the British.
Obviously on heightened alert at all times.
Every minute could be the last minute. It took about a week for me to be over there to realize that there's no way we could win a war over there. We had all this heavy equipment that was sinking into tunnels and disappearing, and they would come out of the ground and disappear. And we were just plopping around fighting an old-fashioned war. So any sane person could see immediately it was a stupid idea and we should get out of there.
That's very important context, which will inform our conversation as we go on and share some takeaways with everyone. Before we do, I selfishly have a story that I have insisted that you share, just switching gears completely, about your early days in the advertising industry. What's interesting is I just wanted you to tell this story because it's so good. And it turned out that, unbeknownst to me, it would be really relevant to this story that we're going to be sharing today.
Oh,
What is the 16-year-old Rondavid Gold advertising story that you could share with us?
I was 16 years old and I was a professional advertising person. By the time I was 16, some of my commercials had already been on the radio, and I was pretty full of myself as a young teenage guy. I had a company car. I was really on top of the world, and really I was an obnoxious kid. There was a new the largest shopping center in the world at the time called Southgate outside of Cleveland. It had 100 stores and it was a big deal. And it was my job to come up with the idea to promote the grand opening. My brilliant idea was to get a member of the Picard family, the famous Picard family who did the underwater exploring. And this was a maverick member of the Picard family who was a balloonist. Here was my idea. We schedule Picard to take off in his balloon, which is pretty spectacular in itself if you've ever seen a hot air balloon taken off. Everybody who came would try and guess where he was going to land. And whoever came closest to guessing where he was going to land would win prizes from all 100 stores. All the stores donated big prizes, little prizes, but they would win 100 prizes. So everybody was excited. It was easy for the stores. When you donate a prize, you get people to come back. It was a win-win situation. The day came. It was a beautiful day. There was a huge crowd there to see him, uncountably huge.
Wow.
So we had gotten a lot of publicity in the papers with ads and so forth. He took off and waved to everybody, and everybody watched him take off. And then they rushed off to find out where he was going to land. And that meant they got in their They got in their cars and started to follow the balloon. And they drove their cars looking up at the balloon. So there was absolute traffic chaos. People were driving into lawns. There were crashes everywhere, people crashing into each other, people on bicycles falling over. Nobody was watching where they were going. They were all looking up at the balloon. And to make matters impossibly worse, if that's possible, Picard was a sneaky guy. He would start to come down to land, and he'd come down close to the ground, and everybody would leave their vehicle, wherever it was, and jump out of their vehicle and run to the spot where he was coming down. And they'd run there, and then he'd go like this, and he'd go back up again. So everybody would run back to their cars. There were news people driving around everywhere. It was a disaster. It was a disaster. So he did this 2 or 3 times where he almost came down and people got out of the car. He finally came down in an open space, which happened to be the grounds of the psychiatric hospital.
I forgot about that.
So these poor patients were looking out and saying, well, maybe I'm not really ready to go. I'm going back to my room. I became infamous in the agency for that, although everyone had thought it was a great idea.
It reminds me of there's an episode of WKRP in Cincinnati with a stunt.
It was a Thanksgiving.
And at Thanksgiving, a helicopter and turkeys, and it is one of the funniest 4 or 5 minutes of TV you will ever see. So from what it's similar.
Yeah. Yeah.
So apparently your career survived that somehow. Yeah.
Yeah. The promotion itself was a big success. All the stores did very well. It got us bad publicity is better than no publicity. It didn't reflect badly on the shopping center, just on the promotion.
Yeah.
And so went on from there. Won prizes for a lot of my promotions that I did come up with, and went to California based on my creds.
That's a good lesson. And even when you have a disastrous moment, it doesn't necessarily mean the end of it all. You said this was a time of being very self-focused, that you weren't necessarily the greatest dude at that moment. And it was reflected in a relationship that you had, which then leads us into your story about being drafted. So could you tell us a little bit about that story?
Sure, it was a defining moment in my life. I went to a football game at Ohio State to be with some of my friends. At that football game, I met this young lady who was very sweet, and it turned out that she was the daughter of the richest guy in Cleveland. And we went out, and it took me into a whole new realm, dating her, took me into a whole new realm of respectability. And I got to go places I had never been able to go before. I was in the front row instead of the back row. I was sitting with the family at the symphony. He was the president of the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra. My family also became raised up socially because I was their son. And we became engaged, and we had an engagement party that was attended by socialites and politicians, including the governor of Ohio. The wedding was getting closer and closer. As it got closer, I realized I was more and more disturbed about why I was getting married to this young lady. And it wasn't that she wasn't sweet. It was that I didn't love her at all, that I was marrying her because of what she could bring to my life and my parents' life. The thoughts kept creeping in. It was bothering me more and more. And on one of my business trips, I was shaving in the morning, getting ready for a meeting, looking in the mirror, and I fainted while I was thinking about it. It's the first and only time I really fainted in my life. And I woke up and I said, I can't do this. I can't do this. The flight I took back to Cleveland to tell her was one of those stormy flights where the stewardesses were scared to death. And I said, this plane's going down and I deserve it. But landed safely. I broke the engagement, broke her heart. It was the toughest thing I had ever done up to that point, and left her in tears and walked out into the rain and walked all the way home from there. Very dramatic, very sad. And her father was infuriated that I had done this, understandably. And he got on the phone and he made a phone call. And the next day I got my draft notice.
I know the story intimately, and just every time you say that, it's crazy.
So that's how I got my draft notice, special delivery.
Can you describe who you feel like you were at that time and how that led you into this engagement that then leads you into Vietnam?
I was a teenager living an adult life. And for me, it was all about being a grown-up and having a great life, and not about other people whatsoever, except how I can benefit from them. Very narcissistic. I did have friends, but I mostly cared about me and my image and how great I was. Remember, I was also playing in a band at night, so I was a saxophone player. Saxophone players were very popular at that time because guitars hadn't taken over yet. So that was a very sexy thing to be a tenor saxophone player with a band. My life was all about me. I was not a good son to my parents. I didn't listen to them whatsoever. I caused them great consternation.
What's so interesting about that is that's been consistent in what you've told me as you evolved as a human, and just to see your relationship with your folks as I experienced it was so beautiful. And it's always been tough for me to put those two pieces together. You told me a lot of stories, but to paste those early stories of being a rebellious, selfish son to who you are now as a human and who you are as a son and how I observed you with your parents it's almost impossible to do other than I believe you, but
Young and foolish.
young and foolish. That's what young's about, right? So now you're this hotshot ad guy, sought after saxophone player in a band, and all of a sudden you're in the army. What is that transition like?
I can't describe properly the trauma of going from the life I had to being in basic training in Fort Knox, Kentucky. First of all, I was with people from the backwoods of Kentucky, not with these smart, witty people that I was with every day. And they were okay people, but they were uneducated people and nothing like me whatsoever. I was the only Jewish person in the barracks. And every day, my whole life was getting woken up before sunrise and getting screamed at by a 6'6" guy who hated me because I was educated. He definitely targeted me and was really tough on me. Plus, I was in terrible physical condition. I was a businessman. I didn't work out. So I was 22 years old and in really bad physical shape. And of course, basic training is famous for being merciless. So every morning in the freezing cold, in the mud, 20-mile hikes with this monster guy shouting at me that I was messing up. That was my life every day. I can't even describe it. I was more than miserable. This was not me. What was I doing here?
It rips open a whole new portal of reality that you'd never even considered.
This was not possible. So I'll tell you a couple of quick things that happened in the barracks. So here are all these guys. They're all in great shape because they worked on farms. And here's me. And conversations in the barracks get very personal about who you are, where you're from. And when I told about my life before, no one believed me, period. They said I was full of shit. I was making it all up. That's not possible. Second of all, we talked about going to church, and I said, I'm Jewish. They said, you're not Jewish. I said, oh, yeah, I'm Jewish. They said, no, you're not. I said, why would I make? They said, we see you in the shower, Gold, and you don't have horns, and you don't have a tail. And they meant it. They weren't saying it in an evil way. As far as they knew, Jews had horns and tails. Not that you should hate them for that necessarily, but that's how different they were from everybody else. So that got out in the open, and then I became exotic because of that. Hey, Gold is Jewish, and it doesn't have horns. And then the thing I did, which turned everything around, was I started writing love letters for them to their girlfriends. And their girlfriends were overwhelmed by their love letters.
Yeah.
And two people got engaged from the barracks because of those love letters. So I became popular in the barracks, but not with the 6'6" guy. I didn't become popular with him. I also got pneumonia.
Oh.
And I was in the hospital for 3 weeks. I was in the hospital with pneumonia and I was delirious. My temperature was 104. And I woke up one night and the guy next to me was muttering and keeping me awake. And it was terrible. And I looked over and he was sound asleep. And I looked over to the guy on the other side of me. It was me. And so one day during all of this, somebody comes in and says, hey, Gold, your mom's on the phone. She hadn't heard from me in a while. So she was worried. The phone was down the hall. It was a payphone. So I had to get out of bed. I could barely move. I struggled to get down the hall. Mom, I have pneumonia and I'll be all right, but she said, what are you doing out of bed? I said, you called me. Get back, get back, get back. You say to yourself, how can this get any worse? It's bad, and now I'm dying in the hospital with pneumonia.
In the last episode, you told a number of stories about events where if you had been where you were supposed to have been,
Yes.
you would no longer be alive. You
That's
share,
correct.
I think,
That's
3
right.
of those stories. They're remarkable. If you haven't heard them, listeners, go back and check it out. It's really unbelievable, except that it happened. There is one more of those stories that we didn't get a chance to share the first time, which has to do with you being in a like 10, 12 person tent. Could you tell us about?
Yes, being in the big tent was a big deal for us because when we got there, we were in pup tents, which meant we buckled on 2 shelter sheets together and tent poles, which you carried with you all the time, and made a tent big enough for 2 people, and you slept on the ground, and it was pretty scary because lots of snakes and so forth. So now we were going to move into a 12-person tent that they set up, and we were going to sleep on cots. And that was a big deal for us. That was like luxury. We moved into the tent, and what happens with human beings is they're very territorial. Your bunk, even though this was a minimal way of living, your bunk was your territory. That was your stuff. That's where you were. And at night, everybody got together by lantern light. We would sit and schmooze. We'd talk with each other about our lives, blah, blah, blah. And we would each sit on the end of our bunks and talk to each other. That added a little bit of comfort to a very uncomfortable situation. So this one evening, I got off my bunk to go to the latrine, which was a pit just outside the camp that you had to walk to. While I was back there, somebody else, for whatever reason, sat down on my bunk. And one of the things we would do at all times in the evening would be to clean our weapons because you knew how important your weapon was to you. So break down your weapon, oil it, put it back together. So the guy across from my bunk, who was always the guy across from my bunk, was cleaning his weapon, and he did the unthinkable, which was to leave a round in his weapon, and it went off and it killed the guy sitting on my bunk. And that's what I saw when I came back to the tent.
Outrageous. So this is one of a series of stories. The final one that I remember was you, which you told in the previous episode, at KP duty, which you were unhappy about for a variety of reasons, being rebellious and angry and not wearing your helmet and getting heat stroke and therefore unable to be on guard duty that night. And the person that went in your place was killed by a sniper, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And that one puts you over the edge to becoming a fatalist, which I remember you talking about as you're getting on the plane, which was right after this last event to return home. You became a fatalist to such an extent that you flipped a coin to decide whether to go to New York or California. Came up New York. This we didn't share. The first day in New York, you got a job. The second day in New York, you got a great apartment where they charged you next to nothing and actually paid for your rent for the first 6 months. So you flip the coin, you land in New York, and these great things start to unfold. And then you meet my mom about a year later. Things just start rolling. Can you summarize for people who may not have heard the first episode, what made you a fatalist because of Vietnam, and what is fatalism to you?
It's kind of obvious what made me a fatalist since 5 times. Once is good luck, twice is good luck, 3 times is no longer good luck, 4 times is definitely not. And by the 5th time, I said, there's something going on in the universe which says that this is the way it's supposed to be. Otherwise, I'd be dead. This is no longer a matter of good luck. This is a matter of something mysterious going on. And we could go through our lives and we could make what we think are our best decisions and try and be good people. But in the end, fate decides what happens to us. That just became very obvious to me, and it changed everything because I didn't take life as seriously as I did before. I was able to enjoy life more. Whatever happened, whether it was good or bad, I said, this was supposed to happen. That's it. And religious people say it's God's will, and I just call it fate. I became so grateful for everything because I escaped death. And a lot of people who do have near-death experiences say the same thing. You wake up in the morning and you appreciate waking up in the morning. You say, whoa, look at this. What a beautiful day. Or isn't the sound of the rain nice? And you find the best in everything. You ignore the worst and you say, well, that's supposed to happen, but overall things are great. And you look on the bright side and you become an optimist and you become grateful for every single thing. And that was a long time ago, and it's been part of my life every single day since.
Yes, and I can attest to it because I've known you my whole life, and that's all I've ever experienced.
Yes, you have.
Had.
Yes, you
I
have.
have my entire life.
Same
Crazy,
here.
crazy coincidence. I remember as a kid you talking about just this gratitude of any day here is better than any day there. So beyond I almost died and didn't, just this real appreciation for being in your life and not being in Vietnam.
Good point. Good point. Anybody who has experienced the bottom of life where you have nothing, and I talk to people who are very successful people, and they say the same thing. They grew up with nothing, and now they have everything, and they have that as a point of reference. If you have that low, have nothing point of reference, you could appreciate being where you are so much more. If you grow up being comfortable and have a good life and everything's good your whole life and then it gets better and better, you could appreciate what you have, but not to the extent of people who started with nothing or who had everything taken away. It just gives you that wider range of appreciation of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. In the last episode, we talked about you being a fatalist and an optimist. And as you and I kept talking for this episode, we got to that word gratitude, which I've always associated you with. I say your default mood is gratitude. And I think that gratitude is really the anchor, it's the higher level piece from which the optimism sprouts.
Yes.
So you're a grateful, optimistic fatalist in this part of your life and now starting to make your way through your career. And I think with anything, there's a learning curve. You've been gifted this new lens through which you can view your life. And you said it before, it's great because I didn't take life as seriously and I had more fun and I wasn't stressed. And two sides to the coin, it serves you in many ways and it could potentially have some pitfalls. What was your experience of that dichotomy? How did that show up?
The pitfall is that you become complacent. You get so optimistic that you start accepting things that you really shouldn't be accepting. And business is one of those ways. When you're growing a business, you're supposed to not be complacent. You're supposed to look for the next best thing, and be driven. I was doing okay in the advertising agency where I was in New York. And I was the creative director of the advertising agency, and I was having many successes with clients. But what I should have been doing is looking for the next step up the ladder in advertising in my career. Because I started at the bottom at this agency when I first arrived in New York, my progress was incremental within that environment. And whereas if I would have put myself out there, I could have made leaps and done other things. I didn't do that, and that's one of my life regrets. I don't have too many.
Yeah.
Is that I was too complacent at that time, and what drove me to move forward was just circumstances and things getting unhappy and impossible, and which kind of drove me out instead of me taking charge of my career and moving it along.
Yeah. And I think you've described to me that you were also surrounded by people who weren't necessarily very creative or hyper intelligent. I'm going to say this about you. You were both. And I think that was a piece of it that started to wear you down as well and start to feel
Right.
misaligned. Is that right?
Back in my Cleveland days, the people I was surrounded with were super bright, super funny, super witty. It was a wonderful experience. And the people around me now are just average working people cranking stuff out. They were nice enough. And again, because I was complacent, I said, well, they're nice enough people, blah, blah, blah. It's a nice enough thing. So yes, that part was missing from my life.
Yeah. It slowly crept up on you over time that this was not bringing out the best in you versus you taking it by the reins and saying, I'm going to do something fantastic right now.
Correct. Correct.
And you've said to me within the fatalistic universe, there's wiggle room every day. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. It's not that you shouldn't make any decisions. you still have to try and be a good person. You still have to try and make what seems to be good decisions. It's just you have to realize that whatever decisions you make are depending on what's actually supposed to happen. But that doesn't mean you're stymied. You try and make good decisions.
Okay. So there's a series of events, and please, listeners, go back to episode 1 with Dad. He tells this amazing Project R story, which has to do with putting advertising in bathroom stalls. It's fantastic. Then Project R ends. You continue along that same path of just being in a somewhat mediocre place. You get to a point where it's clear to you that something needs to change. You go out on your own. And going out on your own is a combination of you having your own agency and then at one point partnering with a wonderful man who I remember fondly, Mario Messina, who's still out there doing the good work that he does. And it's at this point in your life that things start to take a really positive turn in your career. So tell me a little bit about this next chapter of your career, and then I have a story I specifically want you to share.
Mario was a brilliant artist. He was born in Milan. With all the things that I could do, I can't draw. I have no artistic skill. So now I was teamed up with this terrific artist and really great person. So one day we were on business in Italy, driving around the Tuscany area, and we passed these little pub kind of places that were mob. People standing outside. We looked and we saw that they were Prosecco bars. We said, wow, look how popular this is. We don't even have it. There's no such a thing as Prosecco. We found a distributor and we started bringing Prosecco over to the United States and advertising it. So when you enjoy your Prosecco, that's because of me and Mario. Italian champagne. No, those were great days. We did terrific things.
What do you feel like starts to open up for you in this chapter of you kind of being on your own, you being with Mario, and whatever there was that was eating away at you over time previously, it now shifts. What shifts?
What shifts is no one is influencing me except me. If I don't like a client, I tell them I can't serve you anymore. If I don't like a campaign, I don't present it. I don't have to go through layers. I don't have to clear it with anybody. And so it was like throwing off shackles, creative freedom. So it was glorious. It was glorious.
To have no creative shackles must have been just the biggest
Yeah.
breath of fresh air.
Yeah. And my only regret was that I didn't start doing that stuff sooner.
Yeah. So will you tell us the Yamaha story, please?
My wonderful wife, Carol, was the top salesperson for her division of Time Warner, the top salesperson nationally for 20 years in a row. And I actually ended up writing a book about it. That was a different story in a different part of our life. Still the greatest salesperson I ever knew. She could sell me anything. I just don't even try. If she wants something, we just do it because I know I'm gonna lose. She sold magazine space in national magazines, but on a local level. So if you were a bank in a town in New Jersey and you wanted to be in Time, Newsweek, Sports Illustrated, U.S. News and World Report with a full-page ad, you could be in there, even though you were a local guy, because you only had to pay for your local area. So this was a real great product. Every weekend she would get a whole pile of magazines, 25, 30 different magazines, spread them out on the floor and look at what was going on in those magazines to see who was advertising and who might be a possible client or who had a bad ad. Wherever we lived, whatever we were doing, the floor was covered with magazines on the weekends. So I have to preface this part of the story with saying that Carol and I were antiquers. Loved antiques, and one day we were at an antiques fair. We came to a area at the antiques fair where there were beautiful pianos, and one of the pianos was playing by itself. Couldn't believe it. It was playing by itself. And we said, wow, that's amazing. And it was explained to us that this was a Yamaha disc clavier piano, which played computer discs of great artists who recorded those discs and played those discs back as they were recorded on the piano, including the touch, the volume, the technique, everything. Perfect reproduction of this great artist playing. It was magnificent. And the guy said, and you could record on the disc also if you And Carol said, you mean my mother, who was a piano player, could make a disc and I could always listen to her play forever? He said, yep. And then he told us how much it was. And we said, maybe when our daughter graduates from college, we could start saving up for one. So the next week, it's a great story, man. The next week, we got an invitation from the Strauss family, who I had become friendly with. They were the people who owned Macy's, and the grandparents went down on the Titanic. Famous family, really good, charitable people. And we got an invitation to go to Sotheby's, which was down the street from where we lived in New York, to a silent auction for charity to raise money for children's causes. We went in, we were having a good time, went up the stairs, and on the landing going up was one of those pianos. There it was, sitting there playing away, and it was being auctioned off. We said, if we bid on this piano, we could get it for half what we know it's worth. And I said, yeah, but look who we're bidding against. And Carol said, no. Said, these people have grand pianos in their bathrooms. They're not interested in this little piano whatsoever. And as it turned out, she was right. So now we have this magnificent piano, get shipped to our house, and it changed our lives for the better. You could sit around your fireplace and listen to Rachmaninoff play.
It's amazing. It's spooky, but
Yeah.
really beautiful.
All the great Peter Nero, Liberace, all these great pianists on your piano. They're playing on your piano. So one day when the magazines were spread out, Carol said, hey, here's an ad for our piano. And we looked at it and we said, that's a terrible ad. It's like saying, wouldn't it be nice to have this piece of furniture in your house? There was no warmth. There was no emotion to it. We can't stand for that. That's a horrible ad. And the next day, I called up the marketing director of the music division of Yamaha. He answered. It wasn't a secretary. And I said, my name's Ron Gold, and I'm an ad guy, and I'm a musician, a piano player, and I own a disc clavier. And all of us think that your advertising sucks. And it got very quiet. I said, does not do justice to your product. Got very quiet. I expected him to hang up. Always that possibility. He said, I just got out of a meeting just now with a whole bunch of people who agree with you. So he said, you're an advertising guy. I said, yes. He said, what would you do? And I did an ad and sent it to him. And I got the Yamaha keyboard account, and he became a very close friend.
So what I love about the Yamaha story is everything. And then specifically what I'm hearing is now you're fearless, creatively unleashed, having fun, following your gut. You make this call and it works out. What else would you want the listeners to take away from the Yamaha story and just generally this period of your career that you've now evolved your optimistic, grateful fatalism into?
Yeah. Every once in a while, you have a feeling about doing something and you never do it. And then you go back and you say, I should have, and you want to cut out the I should haves in your life. So when you get older like me, you don't go back and say, I should have, I should have, I should have. So go for it. Trust in yourself. Trust that everything's going to work out. And if it doesn't, that's what you're going to learn from, because you don't learn from your successes. You learn from your failures. Go with what you think is right. Take a chance. Do it. It'll never turn out badly in the long run. And that's what I took away from it. And that's what I based my life on after the turnaround. And that's my advice to everyone.
So now we're going to pivot to the segment called It's My Podcast, so there will be music. And and music is such a big part of both of our lives. And I thank you for bringing music into my life to such a deep degree. If there were a song you could preserve at all costs for future generations, what would it be and why? And I'm asking you this, having asked you to share this with me prior to the podcast, and you just outright refused. So
yes, that's because all of your previous guests who were terrific had great choices of their songs and reasons why. And I have no choice because I love music so much, and I love the Great American Songbook so much from the time I was 5 years old and listening to 78 records and singing it and playing jazz on. There's hundreds of songs which are my favorite songs. And it's impossible to pick out one. If I had to pick out one, it would be a song called Shanti and Me.
My heart just cracked in half.
And that would be my favorite song. That's a song I wrote right after my divorce, when I was thinking about Shanti and my relationship with Shanti, and wrote her a song about how I felt. And that's still my favorite song. And maybe in the next one, there'll be a way to play it for you.
Wow, I really didn't see that coming. Thank you. It's such a beautiful song. There's going to be a way for us to share it with the listeners. I know there is. And as a kid, having a song written for you by your dad that just captures the beautiful, powerful simplicity of our relationship. The music is fun and warm and catchy, and I don't know, there's just no gift that a kid could receive that could possibly be more meaningful. So thank you.
Okay, not at all.
I even have, you gave me the handwritten notes to it that I have upstairs as well.
Oh, good.
When you first wrote it out. So.
Yeah. Maybe next time we'll sing it together.
Yeah,
or I'll
you
sing it
will,
for
but
you.
that would be maybe I could play it on guitar. Maybe we could figure that out.
All right, let's figure that out.
All right. Dad, thank you. That's so beautiful. So tell us a little bit more about, you've written 2 books. You've got another book in the making. I know people can find you at rondavidgold.com. Anything that you'd like to talk about in terms of what you're doing in the world currently that maybe we haven't shared with the listener?
No, I don't think so. We're at the giving back part of our lives. We've been very successful, very fortunate. We're very grateful for it. We try and help as many charities as we possibly can. And we're personally involved with quite a few of them ourselves on boards. This is a wonderful, fortunate part of our lives. We're healthy. We feel great. And it means so much to us to be able to be giving back.
You do it beautifully, and it's inspirational to watch. When I say you're the most busy retired guy I know, I mean it. Carol's equally busy. To watch you two in tandem move through life and enjoy each other's company and experience the world together, and then put so much back into the world through the charitable, giving, supportive, wonderful things that you do is really just an amazing testament to who you are, and inspires me to want to be the best I can be.
You are.
Well, thank you. Thank you. The stories that you have are remarkable. I am in awe of who you are, to see your evolution from this guy I never knew, this young, self-centered, successful before his time kid who went through this experience in Vietnam that changed everything, come out with a new worldview, you try it on, it works for you in some ways, it doesn't in other ways, you figure that all out. And you land in front of us here as just an amazing, inspirational, wise, kind, funny.
Good grief. Wow.
Yeah. That's all I've got. That's all.
How lucky to have a daughter which says those things about you. Can't believe it. It's great. I'm a very, very lucky guy.
We're both lucky, and anyone who knows you, I've heard them say the same things, but I'm glad I have the opportunity to say them. So I have a feeling we're going to continue this conversation on the podcast. I know we will in real life, because that's all we do is talk about cool stuff. I love you, and thank you again for being here.
I love you, and it was my honor and pleasure.
Thank you. That brings this episode of Stories We Haven't Shared to a close. I believe stories are our humanity waiting to be shared, and listening makes it possible. Thanks so much for being here today by our virtual campfire. Until next time, and thank you again, Dad. Love you so much.
Love you too.